Azure Compute is a core product, and Compute is the backbone of any Azure infrastructure implementation. If you're an IT pro, moving into Azure Compute will feel very natural to you and is typically a good first step when moving into Azure. There are 4 common services for Azure Compute. Those are virtual machines, virtual machine scale sets, Azure App Services, and serverless computing. Azure Compute provides the following compute resources: disk, processors, memory, operating systems, and networking. And Azure Compute is also an on-demand service for running cloud-based apps. We're going to explore each of the 4 services in a little bit more detail. Starting off with Azure Virtual Machines. Azure Virtual Machines fall under the infrastructure as a service model. A virtual machine is just a physical computer that's been virtualized and is running on a hypervisor of some sort. A virtual machine, just like a physical machine, includes an operating system, a processor. If it's virtual, it'll be a virtual processor, storage, and networking. And we do have to manage our virtual machines the same as a physical machine. We're still responsible for updating it, backing it up, patching it, etc. One of the big benefits of using an Azure virtual machine is we can install software on it. This means that virtual machines are a great option for any customized software or custom apps that you need to run in Azure. Virtual machines are great, but the one thing that they can lack is scalability. When we require scalability and availability, we can use a virtual machine scale set, which simply put is just a bunch of the same Azure virtual machine all running at the same time. An Azure virtual machine scale set provides high availability because we're always ensuring that a virtual machine is available. Virtual machine scale sets also scale automatically as well as load balance automatically. As the workload increases, additional virtual machine instances are added to that scale set, distributing the workload, and the load balancer will distribute that workload across those instances for us. We wouldn't normally use a virtual machine scale set in a small production environment, but we do use it in large-scale deployments. For example, if you have workloads that are seasonal, or maybe workloads that are dependent on something like a sporting event, a virtual machine scale set would meet your needs. Because seasonally, that workload would increase, but only for a couple weeks, or days, or even months of the year. And the scale set would accommodate that change. And for a sporting event, typically that sporting event is only for a few hours. For those few hours, that virtual machine scale set would scale up to accommodate that increased workload, and then scale back when the event is over. The Azure App Service is also considered a core compute option. Unlike the Azure Virtual Machines, the Azure App Service is considered a platform as a service. Using the Azure App Service, you can build enterprise-grade web, mobile, and API apps on any platform. And then Azure would provide a fully managed, secure, and scalable platform for that app. And tied to the App Service is Azure Functions. An Azure function runs a small piece of code instead of the full-blown app. Azure Functions are event timer message or triggered by another event. So something will trigger an Azure function. Typical usage scenarios for an Azure function include IoT or the processing of data. For example, if someone uploads an image, then an Azure function would be triggered to process that image. And the last compute offering we're going to talk about is containers. An Azure container is a slimmed-down version of an Azure virtual machine. But it doesn't include an operating system that we can manage. But that being said, the operating system files can be referenced to run an application. We can also include libraries to run an application. Let's take a look at how a container is built out in Azure. We start off with the Azure platform. On top of that, there's a virtual machine, which would then be running a Windows or Linux server. This is then followed by the container services. I have Docker here, as that is one of the most popular container services for containers. Now keep in mind, you're not building this out. The only thing you're concerned about is the container that's sitting on top of those container services. And there are two Azure services for containers. There's the Azure Container Instances, where you can upload your container to Azure for execution. And that's what we saw in the last slide. The containers sit on top. And this is considered a platform as a service offering. We also have the Azure Kubernetes service, which is an orchestrator service that is used to manage and update large numbers of containers. That is a high-level overview of the 4 Azure Compute services. You should be familiar with all 4 of them before you sit the exam.